that's a bit too much for a quilting video.
So it all started with a Facebook post. Way back in November of 2014, my cousin Leslie, a cousin that I've always looked up to, posted this on her page, looking for quilters. In November 2014, I was still recovering from a terrible work burnout, and I'd been dabbling in quilting for several years.
But I hadn't yet managed to complete one.
So I was attracted by the statement, looking to pull in some quilters for a club. I was enough of a beginner to miss the Judy Niemeyer part and the Quilt Works reference. Maybe the bucket list comment should have been fair warning. And I just replied, I'd like to do it. In the follow-up email she sent, I also didn't notice the word journey. And truly, I'm the type of person who thrives when people say no instructions or what have we got ourselves into. Do you remember my beginner mistakes video where I say start small? And when I ordered my Judy Niemeyer pattern, I also got the add-on kit for the queen size. Now, if you're new to quilting, you may not be familiar with Judy Niemeyer. Her patterns are stunning with intricate blocks, which have curves and swirls and partial seams, and a fair share of them win quilt show ribbons. But I knew none of that. I had also never paper pieced before. And to add one more layer of inexperience to the mix, I decided that I would alter the color layout to make it more firecracky. Basically, I made it as complicated as I could. Then there was the fabric. I had little experience with knowing what kind of yardage to buy, so not only did I buy a lot, I bought so much extra fabric, I most likely will be buried in it. Now, I have made some pretty big mistakes already, and I haven't even started yet. But honestly, joining this group of women is one of the best decisions that I have ever made. The club was in Stony Creek, and we met at this small little church in Shipshewana once a month. Since Stony Creek is almost 2 hours away from where I live in Toronto, my cousin graciously invited me to come down the night before. And that coincided with the Stony Creek Quilters Guild monthly meeting. And through these two groups, I was exposed to other quilters. And some of them were masters. I discovered Show and Share, which motivated me to finish some of my quilt projects I had started. And I discovered workshops, learning new techniques, being exposed to new fabric and designers, and all the things that go on in the quilting world. But most importantly, I had a chance to heal. My burnout gradually faded as I was filled with new purpose and surrounded by new friends. And it wasn't too long before I realized that my 4th of July quilt was a bridge too far for me. And it was tucked away in the back of my sewing space.
And it was added to the UFO list.
Until about 2019. I was still in contact with many of the members of the original group, so we had a UFO challenge to get it done. And the funny thing, it was in the back of my closet, and I thought I was about halfway done, but when I pulled it out,
I was so shocked to see that I had barely even started. It was so darn fiddly. I focused on cutting up the fabrics and getting them into bags, and then I did the outside edge pieces.
Though I had great hopes of finishing it, I think I was about 30% done. And then 2020 started. My son got sick, COVID arrived, and all my sewing equipment was crammed into my bedroom. And with my stress level up to here, instead of fighting these blocks, I embraced their repetition. The methodical process of paper piecing the same block over and over calmed my nerves and soothed my tears. And gradually, block by block, they were checked off the list. And by vlog number 3, I had finally finished all the blocks. Now, the laying out of them took a whole afternoon for me to figure out what was the best layout, how to keep it random. Remember, I could not have made it more complicated. And now for the next step, probably the part that I've been dreading since the very beginning, doing these curved and partial seams. But much to my astonishment, I realized it wasn't any big deal. I had actually learned both of these techniques in workshops in the previous 5 years. So using my 30-minute timer again, it took about 2 months to assemble them all together. And unfortunately, this is where my story stalls again. This is a really huge quilt. It is 96 by 96 inches. And last year at this time, I ordered a wide back batik from fabric.com, the only place in the US and Canada that I could find one, only for the parcel to get lost somewhere between customs in my home. And by the time I figured it all out, fabric.com was all out of stock. So it sat in the blue bag for a little while. I did cut up some of those batiks that I had over purchased into some strips that I was going to make into an after quilt, but truly I felt very little desire to do so. And then in November my phone pinged and APQS was having their long arm display sale. And now looking back, I realized I purchased my long arm just so I didn't have to quilt my 4th of July on my domestic machine. I reordered that wide back online. I finally loaded it on my long arm. But I was really still struggling because I could not find any direction online how to quilt it. The 4th of July quilt is out of print, and it's different from the other Quiltworks patterns in that its shape is irregular. So I discussed it with Tracy at Whirls and Swirls, and we came up with a plan that I should just stitch in the ditch around the firecrackers with a 60 weight glide thread, and then at that point I could decide on any further designs. And I may be an experienced piecer, but I am a beginner long armor. I would do 2 lines perfectly concealed in the ditch, and then the next one I would miss it completely. But I persevered. It took many weeks, and then I pulled it off the rollers, and it sat in the blue bag again. I got distracted with other projects. It was tucked away in a corner so I couldn't see it. But 2 weeks ago, on the Quiltworks social media feed, Judy Niemeyer posted this photo. Me with 6 friends, and 4 of them were from that original Judy Niemeyer club.
Back in 2019,
we stopped in Shipshewana on our way to Hamilton, Missouri, and Judy Niemeyer was the keynote speaker and the featured artist at the Shipshewana Quilt Festival. And if I ever needed a sign to complete this quilt, I think this was it. I loaded the quilt back on the long arm, and with my Dollarstore shower curtain on top, I took a couple of designs for a test drive. And I'm still having difficulty with a plan. The elements are symmetrical, but the edges of them are irregular. And having tested out a number of different designs, the only one I could really settle on was the background. I used this variegated Fantastico, and I think that reinforces that fireworks theme. And I was pretty pleased with the results. Until my thread started giving me grief. All the adjustments that I had learned didn't make any difference, and I had to make an SOS call. After making a few adjustments, I spent a moment under the quilt just looking at the stitch quality.
and I'm glad I had to get underneath because I realized that I've done enough quilting. I don't have to do anything more.
At least not very much. I added these 2 circles to the center of the fireworks.
And that is a wrap. And Mando kept a close eye while I squared up.
From those strips that I had made for the after quilt that I wasn't making, I cut 3.5-inch binding strips, and I sewed it to the back at 1/2 inch. Then I machine bound it from the front. My quilt had one last challenge for me.
We'll have a behind the scenes video of you guys trying to get it all square. No, it's not high enough on this side. Do we have something they can stand on?
What if I come farther this way?
Ah, that's a smart idea. Oh, perfect. Perfect.
And now it's done. It's on my bed.
My husband has claimed it for us.
Every day we are looking at quilt patterns and quilt projects and quilt-alongs, trying to figure out which ones to start. Some quilts are fast and easy and barely make any impression on your life. And some of them will grab you and take you on a journey. You'll fight with it, you'll laugh with it, you'll cry with it. The places you'll go, the people that you'll meet, who knows?